Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Sukhinder Singh Cassidy. Believe me, I practiced that name. Shame on me. And it's an easy name to say. Shame on me. Grace Under Pressure deals with what's so often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring and the commitment that we exert for others. And when you do it as a leader, as Sukhinder is, you will discover they do it to bring people together for common cause and energize the organization for the better. Sukhinder, welcome to Grace Under Pressure. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to go live and chat live.
Great. Sukhinder Singh Cassidy is a leading technology executive, believe me, and an entrepreneur. She's a board member in many places, and she most recently was the president of StubHub, which was sold in 2020 for over $4 billion. And that's a pretty big accomplishment. She is a chairman on the board list and has been profiled in Fortune, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Business Week, and New York Times, just to name a few, okay? She has been named one of Elle's Power Women and one of the most creative people in Silicon Valley, and a top 100 people in the Valley of Business Insider. Her best-selling book, a Wall Street Journal best-selling book, is Choose Possibility. Welcome, Sukhinder.
Thank you so much.
Great. We are going through the period of what's called the Great Resignation. So I have maybe a little bit of a contrarian view because I know it's tough for employers, but I think it's a kind of a liberation for employees. And I think you argue this, that why is it a good time for people to experiment and take chances with their careers?
Well, I think that, I just saw the Great Resignation labeled the Great Rethink. And to your point, it may be more of a rethink than a resignation. So why is it a good time to rethink? Well, first of all, I always say to people, the book I wrote is, Choose Possibility, is all about how to take risks in your career and thrive. And sometimes the risks we take are anticipated, and sometimes they're in response to unanticipated events. So here we are, we're still living with COVID, but we're 2 years in, and we all had a black swan moment, which taught us a lot about our own agility. The things that people struggle with and making change in their lives when things are good. And then all of a sudden you have a black swan event, and every company, every individual had to literally pivot, their family, their personal care, their childcare, their schooling, every dimension of our lives was upended. But in that, we found a lot of our own agility, right? So now here you are, and most people are going back to a booming labor market. The need for talent across every industry has never been greater. Yet people are re-questioning what they want. And I think it's because we just went through this event that helped us understand our own agility, understand our ability to make choices even under pressure, the most negative of pressure, which sort of taught us a lot about what we might want when things are good. And I think that's what's going on for people. They're using it as a kind of a way to reframe, their own possibilities.
I love the way you frame this as having experienced it. And call me naive, but I think we are coming to the end of this eventually. We will. But it is, and I like the way you talked about the Great Rethink and this moment of agility for us, because we've discovered, I'll say, our inner strengths, which is what you focus on in your book, Choose Possibilities. So given that, we're kind of thinking, let's try something new. But when we do, there's always the chance of the grass is not greener on the other side of the fence. Yeah. And you talk about no problem with something called full-on failure. So explain that, Sukhinder.
Sure. First of all, we often think, including at times like this, that we're going through a one-way door when we make a new change or a new choice. And Jeff Bezos, who, obviously is very famous for having built Amazon, would argue in his shareholder letter that one of the reasons Amazon is so agile is because he and their teams have realized that most things are two-way doors. You can go through it. If it doesn't work out, you can come right back. I always say to people, let's say you switched from, the company you loved to a startup, okay, and you didn't like it, and you want to come back. Well, presuming you were in good stead and you were loved, in many cases, but for the cost to your ego, you literally could reverse course, probably. And if you couldn't reverse course, this is why I'll say there are probably many choices after the choice that fails. So you go through a door, it doesn't work out. I'm like, could you get employed by another large company? Likely. Could you get employed by another startup? Likely. Could you, go back to the things you loved without like, okay, maybe a little bit of harm on time? Likely. So if you have a lot of choices after a choice that fails, I would call that full-on failure something that you should reduce your fear of. Because most full-on failures will not result in like no choices available to us. Now, there are some that are one-way doors, but those are a lot rarer than we think. Imagine.
I like the idea of the two-way door, because we do think of it, one leaves a company and then you're not coming back. Although there are instances when people do come back. But I do see it, for example, in my work, someone leaves in their 30s, goes out and establishes, and then he comes back as a senior executive when they're 50s. So that's a long period of time. And they have matured career-wise by doing different things and growing new opportunities. But which is very important when we're thinking of the rethink or the great resignation, is be careful how you leave the door. Leave it open, don't burn any bridges.
By the way, that's important, not just for the two-way door, but for your reputation and everything you want to do going forward. I always say, leave how you would want somebody to leave you. Like, leave well, because even when you've made a great choice, like, part of your legacy on the choice you made and the impact you had is how you leave. What we remember about people is how they end as much as how they begin.
And thank you for that reminder, because I think that's such an integral part of leadership when we talk about the legacy, is leave the place better than you found it, but also how you leave. So thank you for that great reminder. And I think this maybe leads to our next question is, you have a concept called professional priests. Would you explain that to me, please?
Sure. Whenever we're contemplating new choices, we think about who to talk to. And most often we go to the people in our closest circle, our spouse, our partner, maybe our family. And while there is merit in that, there's also some value in having a distinct set of people you talk to about your professional choices, what I call your professional priests. Because, when you say, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference may be people who have the context of your work. They maybe move, they may be a mentor, they may be a colleague, they may be a former boss, they may be somebody from your industry who knows you and B, has nothing but your success in mind, meaning they don't come with their own vested interests. And 3, like, maybe similarly situated, right? And so for sure, my husband is one of my professional priests. But if I put every career decision on my husband, a bunch of things would happen. Number 1, he doesn't have all the same context. Number 2, he's not really here to be my therapist for work. Draining energy from that relationship. Yeah. Obviously, I still talk about with him a lot because he's my life partner. And I still drain him plenty, but I don't want to drain him dry. I really want to go to, and so I have a professional coach that I talk to. And number 3, that professional coach, they are in my inner sanctum. I can literally spend all my time, if I want, obsessing about my fears and insecurities as a leader. And they're meant to hold it, help me reflect, become a better version of myself. And that's my interest.
Well, you're welcome to my world. So I've coached quite a number of senior leaders, and so often an executive coach, and I kind of sad to say this, it's lonely at the top. We often say that, but sometimes the coach is the one confidant, and I find that kind of sad. But I'm glad you framed this as my coach is someone that I can talk to and share things with me. But also, I'm guessing the coach realigns you to it. Hey, Sukhinder, here's this. Look at the bright side, all those kinds of things, and frames new possibilities for you. Am I correct in that? So,
Absolutely. I think one form of a professional priest is what I call a brainstorming buddy. There's certain people in your lives who, when you are trying to maximize your possibilities, have a very specific skill, right? We all know that there are different archetypes in our lives. There's some people who I call the critics. They can see the harm in any situation. And they're the people you want to go to when you're trying to poke holes in a theory, when you're trying to negotiate and protect the downside of something. But they maybe not be the best people when you're trying to generate as many possibilities as possible. So I think there's a very specific phase when we're making choices where we want to maximize the choices available to us. And in that space, somebody who can be a brainstorming buddy, who's, a professional priest, is a very specific kind of partner.
I like how you do this, because some have framed this professional priest perhaps as a personal board of directors, if you will. It might be a coach, it might be a startup expert, it might be a friend, it could be a spouse, but it's, as you explained, different people for different roles. And I think that's so important to understand, because it gives us a wider lens from which to view the world. I mean, we are who we are, but it's getting input from others. And I'm going to say to you, does that take guts to get various inputs from different people? How does it play with you, Sukhinder?
Well, it's interesting. I think it takes vulnerability. So for some people, vulnerability takes a lot of guts. And I think if we could all train ourselves to more authentically talk about our challenges and our imperfections, you there? I think if we could train ourselves to, be comfortable talking about what worries us and our imperfections, we open up the avenue to get, perspectives that are really useful. And for a lot of people, that's really daunting. I mean, people really are afraid of talking about their failure points or their insecurities. And for me, I think the conversation starts when you can say to somebody like, hey, this is what I'm worried about, or this is, what I'm contemplating. So yeah, I think it does require you, if you want to get the most out of it, it does require you to be vulnerable.
Great. And I think, thank you for that reminder, because I think it's so important that I like to say that leaders don't generally show fear, but that doesn't mean they don't feel fear. And the fact that you have a close partner, a professional priest, your coach, whomever, board of advisors, with whom you can confide, that's so important. Otherwise, it wells up inside and will erode the confidence that you exude toward others. So,
absolutely.
Now, we're looking toward this as we think of people moving on. We want to be planful and careful and things like that. But you say there's something maybe right in front of us. It's a new opportunity. Explain that, Sukhinder.
Sure. So, I mean, I think that, there's a lot of benefit in planning, and we all sort of understand this. I always have like a 3 to 5 year rough game plan in my head, or at least a rough goal. And now I'm figuring out all the ways I could get there, right? Particularly when I'm making a big choice. But I think so I think there's value to having kind of what I call a rough plan. But then I think that a lot of the refinement in our planning comes from the serendipitous pursuit of opportunities, or just being open to opportunities, or quite frankly, kind of doing what I call a lot of discovery work. So, from my perspective, planning involves taking risk for discovery, like literally. So, and how does that happen? It happens in the form of generating kind of 10 different things you might be interested in, and pursuing them all in parallel. Like, that is one of the ways to pursue kind of your safest path to get somewhere, and your most audacious stretch dream in your head of how you might, get there. And you can pursue them all at the same time. So I think that when we think about planning, more important than planning from a distance, I think, is having a rough plan, and then getting proximate to the opportunities by actually experimenting and testing a lot of different paths at the same time, in order to get enough information to actually refine our plan and to make a great decision on our choice.
And I think it's something you write about and speak about. But as we look for new opportunities, talk to different people from different segments around you. Not pursue the traditional go on an online site or look at job reviews, job postings, but kind of poke around and see what's out there inside your network, seeing that. Do you agree with that, Sukhinder?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I think a lot of the best opportunities come from inside our network for one important reason. Our networks are willingness to show us opportunity if we've done great work with them. So when you think about, the possibility of you getting something, between an online resume and somebody referring you, the close rates are phenomenally different, right? But who's going to refer you? The person who's going to refer you to a great opportunity is somebody who already knows you well and knows the opportunity. This is the power in our first order network. Our second and third order networks might show us opportunities, but they're not going to go to bat for us when somebody says, who is the person you would recommend? That's something your first order network will do, because they know intimately what you're like to work with, what you're like to work for, what you're like as an employee. And so I think this idea of the power of your first order network is multiple times the power of your total network, because they come with an intimacy and a kind of trusted recommendation. That's why I think that network is so powerful.
As you were speaking, I was having a thought, and one of the things that I work with leaders, and you have been a leader of significantly large organizations, you know that the people at the top are always on stage. But as you were describing your first order network, if you're in that network, you're also on stage. It's how you behave. And I would say, because my bias here is act with grace, and you'll be known for that. Would you have an opinion on that, Sukhinder? So,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, look, all of us wish we could be gracious all the time. That simply isn't true. I can tell you many redos I wish I had, things I, wish I didn't say or didn't say quite that way that might have hurt somebody's feelings or not come out the way I intended. So let's all agree, we all as leaders would like to act with more grace, or employees. I mean, none of us move around the world perfectly. But I think there's another importance to grace, and probably grace is even more valuable at times of imperfection. So there are two standards for me of grace, and let me just separate them out. One is you never make the mistake. You operate graciously all the time. That's the aspiration to which I hope. I wish I would move through life always acting as graciously as I am in my mind. That's not always what happens. I'm blurting something out. I'm speaking too fast. I'm being impatient. I'm making somebody feel rushed. There's lots of times people would say, Sukhinder did not act with as graciously as I would have hoped. But the other
well, I throw myself in the same category, so you're not alone, Sukhinder.
But I would say the more emotional and I would say enduring type of grace is when we give grace to other people's imperfections. And when we are imperfect, somebody gives grace to us. So I would hope as a leader, more than being perfectly gracious all the time, which is an impossible standard to which I would always love to aspire, I guess I'd hope to be a leader who gives grace to others for their imperfections and would seek in return the same grace for my own. That's maybe a more attainable type of grace, but also a more valuable one.
Right. It's human, and getting toward that, since you are being so candid, there's something called the scaring secretaries. What did that teach you about?
What's so interesting, it taught me a couple different things, and I've related this story in the book and outside of it. When I first came to Silicon Valley, I was coming from investment banking and from the media industry. And although I was young, I was actually really well treated in two relatively, male dominated industries. I had bosses who gave me plenty of opportunity. I had people who kind of kept encouraging me to just knock the cover off the ball and gave me more challenging things to do. And I felt like really actually supported in my ambitions. And then I got to the Valley, and on my second day on the job at an interactive TV company, my boss said to me, "You're scaring the secretaries." And I remembered at that moment thinking, what do you mean? I haven't done anything. I literally have just arrived here. So I'm getting this actually pretty, for somebody who's junior, pretty negative signal on day two. I'm like, what could I possibly done? And my experience from there actually went downhill. Instead of feeling like I was given grace, for who I am and how I show up, I mostly felt like certainly judged. And, in the ensuing days and months, I mostly felt like I was given less opportunity than I thought I was capable of. I had at least one conversation with my boss where, we kind of went a little head to head, and he told me I needed coaching. And I said, look, I see people who honestly act with a lot of volatility at work every day. And quite frankly, they get a hall pass and I've done nothing. And I'm not really sure why you're saying I'm the person who needs coaching. Nobody's ever told me that before. Really, they have not. They've mostly said keep going, you're doing great. And so I actually ended up leaving that opportunity. I quit my job. I just felt like I was not in an area where my culture fit was great with my boss or potentially even the organization, but mostly my boss. And I moved on. And I guess what I feel about that situation is mostly, we all thrive and grow where our values fit. And we often, you use this word grace, but grace is also, as we said, about feeling included, feeling valued, feeling, like I said, we're given grace for who we authentically are and how we authentically show up, as opposed to feeling judged. Those words are also interrelated. And I always say to people, go where your values fit, because where your values don't fit, at least you'll never completely overlap with somebody else's values, but enough need to overlap that you go to work and you feel safe, included, able to be authentic, because that's when we take the real risks to have more impact.
Which,
Take those.
and I'm glad you talked about that. When we feel safe and included, and Amy Edmondson's great work on psychological safety is all about that, being able to express oneself and be genuine and all of those kinds of things. But it's also, bottom line, it's good for the organization to promote that, because you create an opportunity where people can thrive rather than shrivel. So,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But keep in mind, organizations and leaders create that in their microenvironments. I've made the mistake of thinking that if I'm the CEO of an organization and I say, hey, let's take more risk, I'm imperfect, look at all the things I do wrong, I fail all the time, why are you guys afraid of failure? What I've learned? That you can say all those things that you want as a CEO, but what people judge is what's happening in their proximate environment. Managers, who is managing you directly, the team you're working with most of the day, that will determine your day-to-day sense of inclusivity and safety. So as much as I can say, hey, we want to be gender unbiased, we want to be, there's a lot of distance between what you might say as a leader, you want the values of an organization to be, and what people experience in their day-to-day going to work. And people's happiness is very correlated to that. So I'm not taking myself off the hook as a leader, not at all. I'm just saying, through years of learning, I've learned that people's microenvironment is what really matters when it comes to feeling safe at work.
Absolutely, and I think you point out something which is, perhaps when we peel back the layers here, while companies would openly espouse the principles of psychological safety, how deep are they probing into the organization? And there's the concept of the toxic boss, the bully boss, and so many people say, well, why do they stick around? Well, because, quote, the easy thing is they make the numbers. Yeah. But when they talk about the numbers, they talk about maybe sales quota or whatever it is, those metrics. But what about engagement, absenteeism, turnover? What about those numbers? And I think that's what you have a perspective, both as you're a junior employee and now as a senior leader.
Yeah, absolutely. That's true. And look, the good news for us as leaders is there are no excuses. I mean, there's so many tools available, Glint, Pulse, like the number of software tools that exist to take the pulse of an organization at the micro level. You don't need to go to Glassdoor to figure it out. You don't need to go to Blind. I mean, literally, you can pulse your organization and give people, anonymous feedback, and you get very quickly like what's happening within the immediate span of control of these different teams. And you see the variation in people's happiness levels and answers to standard questions are deviate, very far from the norm based on their microenvironment.
It's interesting too, and there's also the concept of, well, it's you're in Silicon Valley, and it's what the Dave Packard and Mr. Bill Hewitt taught, which is management by walking around. Just get the feel of the place. And did that help you as a senior leader when you were more senior, just being having open conversations with employees? So
yeah, of course, but I think it did. Now we're in a hybrid environment, so that's hard. Yeah. But I would say even more than management by walking around, I think you need to create vehicles in which you can chat with people directly. So maybe you're going to do I had open office hours at StubHub, and I was like, hey, if you want to sign up for 15 minutes, come on in. And anybody could sign up, and not that many people took me up on that offer. So sometimes I'd have to go and sit down with teams. But the people who did, I just got a great view of the organization completely flat, right? And so I think that's one version of management by walking around, is you have to create vehicles in which you can sort of see through the organization. Another one is OKRs. Like, lots of times people just want to hear the goals for the organization from their direct reports. I'm like, why don't you have the team present the OKRs? Then you can see like 2-3 levels deep, because, one of the key constructs for any company is the people who are adding the most value, the people who are kind of owning and operating bigger areas of responsibility. That doesn't mean they're your direct reports. That means 2 or 3 levels in the organization is where like the action is really happening. So you want to be witness to that action and, get to meet the people and see kind of hear their thoughts. And like I said, I think the more you can shrink that distance, the more you're going to get a real sense for, the talent in your own organization.
I think that's great. I love your idea of having the people, having folks in the organization recite the values or present the values or the goals and what are there.
The
Yeah.
goals. Exactly. Have the
Yeah.
people who created them present them. Like, why are we following this traditional model where the only person who gets to present the goal is the person who directly reports to you? It's a very, that actually increases the distance and, quite frankly, the communication, which is tough.
So circling back to our talking about the Great Resignation, rethink where people are going, you say looking for a new job, you don't have to be, quote, specifically qualified. What did you mean by that, Sukhinder?
I always say to people, I've never had a job for which I was qualified. And people are like, what? I'm like, you just look at every job I ever did. When I was a founder for the first time. When people asked me to run local and maps, I'd never built a local maps product. When they asked me to run international, I knew nothing about running an international organization. So people were always betting on my previous accomplishment and my future potential, right? So I think when you're thinking about jobs for which you're not specifically qualified, that's called growth, by the way. Like, whenever we step into something we haven't done before, people are like, well, I feel like an imposter. I'm like, imposter syndrome is just the other side of growth. I mean, because by its very virtue, if you're trying to learn something new, you haven't done it before. So what you're really trying to demonstrate to people is you have the capacity and the agility to learn new things, as evidenced by the things you've done. And so I think that is really important. I think if you want growth, it often means going for the thing you're not specifically qualified for, but generally qualified to learn.
Right. No, I love that. And something I talk to executives about is assuming it's not an immediate replacement or a burning platform. Don't hire for today, hire for tomorrow. And I think what you said from the employee side, job candidate side is, I can grow into this job and maybe take it where no one else had thought about it. Do you have a perspective on that, Sukhinder?
I mean, same thing. I think that, when we take the job for which we're not qualified, two things happen. First of all, our own growth and learning accelerates. But B, we often presume that the best person to do the job is the person who's done it before. But the person who, is hustling, is driving to learn, and who brings a fresh perspective often just brings a different kind of energy and set of solutions to a problem. So, there's no right answer. There have been times I have hired people for the job who were more than qualified because I needed their expertise at that point in time and all of the value of their history. But I would always say that, you want to have headroom for anybody you're hiring to be able, I want to hire people who are curious, have the capacity to learn something new, and who are capable of stretching themselves into that next assignment, not just here because they're good at one thing. And so I think that's always the challenge is you want to find people who can hit the ground running and give you leverage today. But quite frankly, you want people who can see tomorrow's problem they haven't seen yet and figure it out. And I think that's where the learning is for others as well.
Okay. And I think related to that, and as we're closing the circle on this idea of choosing a new job or career path, whatever, how do you know when it's time to leave?
I always say to people, I think when you are, when your impact curve, first of all, like let's say you've achieved a goal, okay, that's a time to identify, is this a time to move on or not? But if you believe you can still have more impact, people often stay, even past a goal, right? Because if they're like, hey, I got what the thing I achieved, but wait, I see the next opportunity for impact. So people generally stay when they believe they can have more impact, right? When people feel like their impact is topping out, that's often when they think about leaving, right? And so I think the question to ask yourself in those moments before you just leave is number one, is there more impact and learning I can have here? Growth and contribution. And if the answer is yes, the question is what's stopping you from achieving it? And if what's stopping you from achieving it is asking for something new, is asking for new responsibility, those are things you should go, quite frankly, fully mine where you still are. If it's like, I'm not having the impact I want because I'm not of a failure in my execution or my desire or my capacity, but, I have friction with my boss, I'd ask the same question. I'll be like, is your opportunity for contribution stopped because your values don't overlap or because you've never had the conversation? So I think, when we talk about not leaving before you leave, I have left many organizations. I mean, I say to people, like, I manage my career in 5-year increments. Yeah, but there have been times where the thing I wanted was just not available. I was at Google for 6 years and I wanted to be a CEO. I wanted to be the CEO. That was not going to happen at Google. That was the one ambition they could not give me. And so I very happily moved on, right? Other times I want to move on when it's hard. But, if I still have the capacity to contribute and have more impact, I don't want to move because I failed to exploit, the opportunity to deliver that. And that's really about more harder conversations and trying to stay where you are, and figure it out.
What I love that information, how it can can I still contribute? Can I still have impact? And what's going on with me? Thank you for that rich answer. Just lots of stuff to unpack in there. We're sadly coming to the end of our show, and I always ask guests a story about grace. And do you have one you wish to share with us, Sukhinder?
Well, I would say as a leader, and that probably comes back to what I said before. I feel like many, many, many times, almost on a daily basis as a leader, somebody in the organization is giving me grace. And what do I mean by that? I mean, I show up in every meeting with all my energy and all my imperfections. Inevitably, somebody in that meeting is rushed, is anxious, is hurried along by my impatience. There's somebody whose sentence I cut off by finishing it because my mind is working on the next thought. And I would say mostly as a leader, I feel like I get grace every day from the people who work with me, who understand and appreciate that I'm there trying to get the job done and I'm not always perfect. And I think that's kind of if you think about the value of that kind of grace, like I feel like I get it every day as a leader because I know that they're, 7 times out of 10, I'm not doing something the way I ought to. And I'm, racing towards progress and maybe leaving, hopefully not dead bodies, but certainly, let's put this in not perfection behind me. And I feel like I get the grace of employees, and teams every day, and like forgiveness for, even my flaws as a leader.
Okay. Well, what a wonderful answer. And I loved how you began it, Sukhinder, by saying, I bring to the meeting all of my energy and my imperfections. So you are a woman and a leader with terrific insight and self-awareness. So brava. So Sukhinder, how can people find you?
Well, you can always find me on LinkedIn at Sukhinder Singh on LinkedIn. It's a pretty easy place to find me. You can learn more about the book and take kind of a fun risk quiz on your own style on choosepossibility.com. But I'm mostly on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out professionally.
Okay. Well, Sukhinder, it's been a treat to have you on the show. And with that, I will say goodbye and thank you.
Thank you.